Every great empire begins with confidence. Not blind confidence, but earned confidence built on victories, expansion, and success. At the start, power feels justified. Systems work, people believe in leadership, and money flows in predictable ways. This early stage creates the illusion that the empire has solved the problem of survival. Leaders begin to think collapse is something that only happens to others. History shows that this belief is where decline quietly begins. When an empire is young, financial discipline exists because survival demands it. Resources are limited, and every decision matters. But as territory expands and wealth increases, restraint fades. Governments grow larger, military spending increases, and public expectations rise. Citizens become accustomed to stability and comfort, and leaders feel pressure to maintain that lifestyle at any cost. Over time, spending becomes less about necessity and more about preserving power and popularity. At first, rising expenses don't seem dangerous. Taxes increase, trade expands, and new lands bring fresh resources. The economy appears strong enough to absorb the cost. But no empire can expand forever. Eventually, borders stabilize while costs continue to grow. Armies must still be paid, infrastructure maintained, and public loyalty purchased. When real economic output can no longer keep up, leaders face a difficult choice: reduce spending and risk unrest, or manipulate the financial system to delay consequences. History shows which option is usually chosen. Ancient Rome offers one of the clearest examples of this pattern. Early Roman society understood the importance of trust in money. Roman coins were valuable not because the government declared them so, but because they contained real metal. Silver coins were silver, gold coins were gold. This created confidence not just within Rome but across its vast trade network. Roman currency was accepted everywhere because it held intrinsic value. As Rome expanded across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, the cost of maintaining the empire exploded. Massive armies were stationed along distant borders. Roads, aqueducts, and cities required constant upkeep. Public entertainment and food distributions were used to prevent unrest among citizens. All of this required enormous resources. Over time, tax revenue could no longer support the empire's spending habits. Instead of reducing expenses, Roman leaders chose a quieter solution. They began reducing the amount of silver in their coins. The coins looked the same, weighed the same, and carried the same official markings. But inside, they were worth less. At first, the change was subtle. Most people didn't notice. The government could now mint more coins using the same amount of silver, effectively creating money without producing new wealth. This strategy worked temporarily. The empire continued functioning, soldiers were paid, and public spending continued. But economic reality cannot be hidden forever. Merchants soon realized that coins bought less than before. Prices began to rise, not because goods became more valuable, but because money became weaker. Soldiers demanded higher wages and citizens felt the pressure of shrinking purchasing power. To cover rising costs, the Roman government produced even more debased currency. Each round of money creation made the problem worse. Inflation accelerated, trust eroded, and trade became increasingly difficult. People began hoarding real goods instead of currency. Barter returned in many regions, a clear sign that money was losing its role as a reliable medium of exchange. Rome did not fall at the moment its currency weakened. That is an important detail. The empire continued for decades after the first signs of monetary decay. This delay is what makes the mistake so dangerous. When consequences are not immediate, leaders assume the strategy is working. They confuse postponement with success. As inflation worsened, economic inequality increased. Those closest to power could protect themselves, while ordinary citizens struggled. Savings lost value, wages failed to keep up with prices, and social tension grew. The weakening of money undermined everything else. Military loyalty declined, trade networks fractured, and regional stability collapsed. By the time Rome faced external threats, its internal foundation was already compromised. The fall of Rome is often blamed on invasions or political corruption, but these were symptoms, not causes. Once trust in money was damaged, the empire lost the glue that held its economy together. Without stable currency, taxation failed, armies weakened, and administration became ineffective. Rome's decline was not sudden, it was financial at its core. What makes Rome's story so powerful is how familiar it feels. Leaders believed they had found a solution that avoided hard choices. Citizens trusted that the system would continue functioning. For a long time it did. That illusion of control delayed reform until it was too late. Rome teaches us a critical lesson. Empires rarely collapse because they lack resources. They collapse because they misuse them. And once financial discipline disappears, decline becomes inevitable, even if it takes generations to fully unfold. The mistake that weakened Rome did not disappear with time. It simply evolved. Centuries later, Spain rose as the dominant global power, fueled by unprecedented access to gold and silver from the Americas. On the surface, Spain appeared unstoppable. Wealth poured into its treasury, armies expanded, and political influence spread across Europe. But beneath the surface, the same dangerous pattern was forming once again. Spain's problem was not a lack of money. It was too much easy money. The sudden influx of precious metals created a false sense of security. Instead of using this wealth to build productive industries and a resilient economy, Spain relied on gold itself as proof of strength. Spending increased rapidly, especially on wars and political ambitions across Europe. Because money seemed abundant, discipline faded. As gold flooded into the economy, prices rose. Inflation spread not just in Spain, but throughout Europe. Local industries struggled to compete with cheap imports, and domestic production declined. Why invest in manufacturing when gold could simply be spent? Over time, Spain became dependent on external goods while producing less of its own. The economy became fragile, supported by continuous inflows of precious metals. When those inflows slowed, reality struck. Debt had accumulated, industries were weak, and government spending remained high. Spain declared bankruptcy multiple times. Military strength declined, political influence faded, and the empire entered a long period of stagnation. Once again, the collapse was not sudden. It was the result of years of financial mismanagement masked by temporary wealth. The British Empire followed a similar trajectory, though with more advanced financial tools. Britain did not rely on gold alone. It built a sophisticated banking system, global trade networks, and industrial power. For a long time, this allowed Britain to manage its empire more effectively than its predecessors. But even Britain could not escape the consequences of excessive spending. The two world wars placed enormous strain on Britain's economy. To fund military efforts, the government borrowed heavily. Debt levels soared, and financial flexibility shrank. The gold standard was abandoned, not because it was outdated, but because it restricted the ability to spend freely. Britain survived the wars but emerged economically weakened. Debt servicing consumed resources that could have been invested in growth. Colonies became less profitable, and global influence shifted toward new powers. Britain did not collapse in chaos. It declined through financial exhaustion. The empire shrank, not because it lost its intelligence or culture, but because it could no longer afford global dominance. Across Rome, Spain, and Britain, the same pattern appears. When faced with rising costs, leaders choose financial shortcuts. They weaken money, increase debt, or rely on easy wealth instead of addressing structural problems. These choices delay consequences but magnify them. The most dangerous aspect of this mistake is how normal it feels while it's happening. Inflation becomes routine. Debt becomes policy. Emergency measures become permanent. Citizens adapt, believing the system is stable because it still functions. Collapse does not arrive with alarms. It arrives quietly, through normalization. History shows that wealth without productivity is an illusion. Money without discipline eventually loses meaning. Empires fall not because they lack intelligence, but because they believe they can bend economic reality without consequences. Modern economies often believe they are fundamentally different from ancient empires. Technology is advanced, financial systems are complex, and currency is digital. But while tools have changed, human behavior has not. The same pressures that shaped Rome and Spain still exist today. Governments face rising costs, political pressure, and public expectations. The temptation to delay consequences remains as strong as ever. Today's money is not backed by gold or silver. It is backed by trust. Trust in institutions, governments, and future productivity. As long as that trust exists, the system functions. When trust weakens, instability grows. History shows that trust erodes when people feel money no longer reflects real value. Inflation does not destroy societies overnight. It works slowly. Prices rise gradually, wages lag behind, and savings lose purchasing power. Asset prices increase, creating the illusion of prosperity. People feel richer while becoming more dependent on debt. This process is subtle, which is why it is so effective at hiding risk. Empires do not fail because people ignore history. They fail because they believe history no longer applies to them. Each generation assumes it is smarter, more advanced, and more capable of managing complexity. This confidence delays reform and deepens vulnerability. The core lesson from every empire is not about fear or prediction. It is about discipline. Economic reality cannot be avoided indefinitely. Spending must align with productivity. Money must represent real value. Trust must be protected, not exploited. For individuals, understanding these patterns is powerful. You cannot control global systems, but you can recognize when history begins to rhyme. You can think long-term, value real assets, and avoid blind faith in promises of permanence. Empires rise and fall, but awareness creates resilience. Rome, Spain, and Britain all believed they had time. They all believed their systems would hold. They were all wrong. Their collapse did not begin with enemies at the gate. It began with decisions made quietly, justified as temporary solutions, and repeated until trust was gone. History does not repeat as tragedy or comedy. It repeats as a lesson ignored. The greatest empires were not destroyed by force alone, but by financial choices that weakened their foundations from within. And that lesson remains as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago.